It started quietly, the way the worst things sometimes do. A single morning where the light just felt wrong. Not gone, not dim, but almost sick, like someone hung a thin gray cloth over the sky. And here's the part that still gets me. Nobody knew it was the beginning of the darkest year in human history. 9 seconds in, and you're probably wondering, what could make an entire year so bad that historians still whisper about it? I'll tell you. People woke up in the spring of 536 and looked up to see a sun that glowed like the moon, pale, weak, almost embarrassed to shine. Imagine trying to start your day, but it looks like twilight even at noon. You step outside, squint, wait for your eyes to adjust, but they never do. The world just stays gray, and folks didn't know why. No meteor, no explosion, no warning. Just a sky that refused to brighten. Here's the next hook. This wasn't a normal fog. It lasted 18 months. Think about that. A year and a half where the sun barely showed its face. They called it a ghost sun. Crops stopped growing. Birds flew in confused circles. Temperatures dropped so fast that people thought the gods were punishing them. And if you lived in 536, you were scared to sleep because you didn't know if you'd wake up to a world even colder than yesterday. Now here's where it gets darker. As weeks passed, the fog thickened. Farmers walked into fields where wheat should have been waist-high, only to find stunted plants, curled and yellow like they'd been burned by a cold fire. Harvests failed across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Famine spread quietly at first, then violently. You'd trade almost anything for a handful of grain. People began grinding tree bark into flour. Soup became something you made by boiling whatever you found and hoping it didn't poison you. And here's the hook again. Scientists today believe a massive volcanic eruption is what caused the sun to dim, but in 536, people thought the world was ending. Imagine being a child then. Your mother holds your hand, pulling you through a marketplace that smells like smoke and desperation. Merchants whisper about omens. Priests warn of divine anger. You hear your father say, under his breath, that even at noon the frost refuses to melt. Every day feels like permanent evening. Every night feels too long. Now here's the part nobody prepares for. When a region collapses, it doesn't happen with a single blow. It happens quietly. One missing shipment of grain. Then 2. Then 3. Villages vanish, swallowed by hunger. Trade routes break. Armies weaken. Wars start over crumbs. In Constantinople, records described a sun that gave forth no light. In Ireland, monks wrote that crops fail from January to December. In China, the sky was dark with dust, and snow fell in summer. Pause for a moment and picture that. Summer, snow, that's the kind of detail that makes your stomach sink, right? Then came the diseases. Famine weakens bodies, and weak bodies cannot fight infection. Plague swept into the crackling instability, like it had been waiting. Historians think it killed tens of millions in the years that followed. Entire families vanished in weeks. People buried so many loved ones that graveyards overflowed. In some towns, funerals were done in silence because there were too many to mourn. Here's another hook. Even the strongest empires nearly collapsed. Trade networks froze. Armies couldn't march. Leaders couldn't feed their people. Everywhere from Rome to Persia to China felt the weight of the dim sun. And still, no one knew why it was happening. No one had the answers. Now, imagine living through month 8. The fear becomes normal. Darkness becomes routine. The older ones whisper that the world used to be bright, but the young barely believe them anymore. Children who grew up in 536 probably didn't even remember what warm daylight looked like. And then came something worse. A second volcanic eruption, then a third a few years later. It was as if the earth itself was shaking in anger, and every eruption kicked more dust into the upper atmosphere, reinforcing the haze, keeping the sky gray. Economies shattered. Kingdoms fell. Armies disappeared into famine and disease. This is the part that always hits me hardest. People kept diaries where they wrote lines like, "We have not seen the sun for many months. We live in darkness every hour. And I fear the end is near." Historians call it the beginning of the late antique Little Ice Age. But people living through it didn't have a name. They only had fear. Here's the twist, though. Human beings are stubborn. Even when the world collapses, people don't give up easily. They rebuild in small ways. They share food even when they barely have any. They protect children they're not related to. They light candles even when the darkness feels endless. Slowly, after more than a year, the ghost sun began to return. The haze thinned. The world warmed. Birds came back. Crops recovered. Some people didn't live long enough to see it, but many did. And they didn't just survive. They adapted. They rebuilt civilizations that still shape us today. If you think about it, that's the real story here. Not just the darkness, but the fact that humanity refused to disappear inside it. And maybe there's a small lesson in that. Even the worst year in human history eventually passed. Even the deepest dimming of the sun couldn't erase us. If you made it this far, you're probably the kind of person who loves deep stories, hidden history, and the strange parts of the past that nobody teaches in school. I think you and I would get along well. So do me a simple favor. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Drop a comment telling me which part shocked you the most. And tap like so more people can find this tale. I'll be waiting for you in the next video.